Ethics of Our Fathers. A key work where there are plenty of pirushim on and explanations on, and people have been through it many times. What I want to do with you over the next few weeks is go through Rav Hirsch's explanations, but I don't want to go through the entirety of it and systematically work our way through Aleph, Beis, Gimel, different Mishnayos. I want to go through each parak. Each parak will have its own podcast, and the goal will be to really just draw out the unique and transformative points that I found in the Pirush. Obviously, the stuff he writes is beautiful, poetic, and moving, but not all of it did I find was like, wow, that is a key concept that I now see rooted in Judaism, that is really cool. And that's what I want to do. So let's open up with the first parak, Parak Aleph. Now, Rav Hirsch really focuses on 2 points, and I'll try and weave them together. The fact that it's Moshe Mekebel Torah Sinai, that he received the Torah from Sinai. The obvious question arises, why not from God? And because that really is the first point, it wasn't from God in the classical sense of the word. And he quotes someone called Wesley, who speaks about that the whole point is that it came from Sinai. That is a universal message to a Jew. Every Jew takes part in this. It wasn't given to one Jew. It was given to all of us. But even in the narrative stage, the Jewish people stood at Sinai together. You sort of fall into the what's often described as an argument for Judaism, that Judaism began in a unique way. It began in a universal way. It began where every Jew took part in it. Now, however convincing or non-convincing you find that argument, it is definitely a unique perspective that Judaism opens up with. And this really does paint the picture for Rav Hirsch for the first couple of Mishnayos, is this sort of democratization of Judaism. Judaism isn't about it came from one person and we trust one person. The narrative of the Torah is that the entirety of Judaism was given this together. And that's the testimony we are giving over at the Seder night. That's the narrative our children join. That's why it begins. Moshe received the Torah from Sinai, a location, not God, a place. Because we all take part in that. That testimony of a people is what we pass down today with our children at the Seder night. So we're part of it. And Rav Hirsch then moves on to the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, and he asks, why were they called great? Well, he talks about how the adjectives that we use to describe God used to be great, but then when the Jewish people experienced exile, they sort of changed and they felt it wasn't appropriate to refer to God as great and mighty because we were in exile. But Rav Hirsch says the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah put that back in. They put that back in because they saw the survival of the Jewish people in exile to be an expression of God's greatness. The survival and the continuation of the Jewish people through the long exile would be once again a testimony to God's greatness in the world. And I thought this was really great. This idea of weaving together the sort of 2 classical inspirations for a Jew to remain committed to his religion is the universality of the message to each Jew, and each Jew takes a part in that from the point of view of testimony, but also the experience of being a Jew in this world, that the mightiness and the greatness of God is manifest in our lives by a mere survival, a survival throughout history with his message, not that we had a temple and now we don't, and now God is diminished. By our mere survival, holding on to this message throughout history is an expression of the greatness of God. Hence, the accolades of greatness and mighty were reinstituted by the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. Now, this follows through to the next stages where Rav Hirsch discusses that you're supposed to raise up many students and this sort of thing that the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah said. And Rav Hirsch points out that this once again is following in the same path in the making of Judaism from a perspective of law, like a democracy almost. The rabbis wouldn't institute laws unless it was accepted by the people, and the people were expected to know. Rabbis weren't able to speak down from above to a group of ignorant followers. No, they spoke to people who understood the law. That's why in today's day and age, if a rabbi comes out with an idea, if it's rubbish, it will be taken apart, because the democratization of knowledge and learning is a key part of Judaism. Once again, flowing into the idea of the identity of a Jew is immersed in Torah, immersed in the message, and yes, there's hierarchies, but the way Rav Hirsch puts it so beautifully, it was the only authority figure whose job it was to make themselves redundant. And Rav Hirsch sees that beginning the story of Pirkei Avot. So moving on to the next point, the idea of nearness to God. Don't ask for reward. Don't serve God for reward. Rav Hirsch points out an interesting paradox, the idea of like intimacy breeds closeness. Rav Hirsch points out that intimacy to God doesn't breed familiarity in the classical sense of the word, because think about it. When you are closer than another human being, your similarities between them make you closer to them, thereby a certain carelessness can filter into your relationship. For example, you're married and you get on with your lives together and you get on and you're friends and you love each other and it's wonderful. A certain familiarity can breed a certain distance. How so? You're so familiar you don't say thank you. Now, the person can say, why do I have to say thank you? I mean, we live together, she does this, I do that. No, but you have to remember you before you got married because you want to hold on to that respect that can wither away with familiarity. Rav Hirsch points out that's not the case with God. Familiarity actually breeds a certain awe, because what are you becoming familiar with? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the source of existence. So if you put it into abstraction, you're in relationship with the ultimate truth, with the ultimate good, and thereby your recognition and your familiarity with that breeds awe, not breeds familiarity, in which case your service of God isn't to get things. Your service of God is to be close with that ideal. It's a little bit abstract, but you can play it into your own lives as you will. But the idea of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu for something else, like what is that something else? I should be getting reward. What? No, you're in line with the ultimate good. You have the most noble mission. You're pursuing truth to the best of your ability. That is why you serve the Almighty. And that doesn't breed closeness in the classical sense. It breeds a feeling of self-respect. It breeds a feeling of being in line with a noble mission. And that is reward itself. So we have our first point on the democratization of Judaism and the idea of that sort of like argumentation flowing itself in at the very beginning. Now we have this idea of approaching the Almighty. Now let's deal with the idea from Rabbi Yochanan. Basically, the idea of not to speak excessively with women. The language is sicha im ha'isha. And Rav Hirsch does a cool move with this. He says the context of this Mishnah is actually the importance of the home. It's about how your home should be a certain type of home in relationship to the poor. And who runs the home from a Jewish standpoint? Who has the authority in terms of the development of the home? The mother. So Rav Hirsch describes that the words sicha im ha'isha do not speak excessively with one's wife, and even more so with someone else's wife. Rav Hirsch points out this isn't derogatory. He's not doing that as bad apologetics. The word sicha means sort of like gossip. It's later on in Pirkei Avot as well used in that context. And he just points something out very simple, that a person who respects his wife won't just speak to her in idle chatter. That will not be the context of all his conversations with his wife. If you respect your wife, if you respect the wisdom and the perspective that Rav Hirsch asks for us to have in a relationship. And he says, you will seek counsel together. The way I say, you should learn together. You should engage in things more than just the workings of the home or, I don't know, idle gossip. Someone who you respect doesn't mean you don't ever have frivolous conversations. That's not the point here. The point is that shouldn't be what all you do. And thereby, in the context of the respect for the home at the beginning of the Mishnah, Rav Hirsch says it would be bizarre to be derogatory at this stage. And if a person truly respects their wife, they will look at that person as being someone they would engage in counsel with, in serious conversations with as well. And that is just I suppose, an angle in what it means to have a Jewish home. The last two that I want to point out on is one is moral manslaughter, which I think is a beautiful term in this context. And the other one is something that I find to be so relevant to the modern world, the idea of virtue signaling, which we see Rav Hirsch warning us against. Now, the first one, Avtalion, and the last one is from Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. Avtalion talks about you be careful with your words unless you incur exile. And Rav Hirsch points out that when someone is speaking about complex issues, when someone is speaking about complex matters, which anybody who's in the role of a teacher or in a religious guide has to be careful with their words. Because if your words are full of ambiguity, aren't clear, and someone goes off because of your lack of explanation, you can incur exile. Who incurs exile in the Jewish tradition? Someone who kills by mistake. And Rav Hirsch says that's what you're doing. You're committing moral manslaughter because of your laziness, for your inability to articulate yourself well, prepare for what you're saying. You may make people go off. And if people go off because of your lack of preparation, your inability to speak in an area or a context where you should have been ready, you're responsible. You're not completely responsible, but you bear a burden. Hence, it's not murder, it's manslaughter. Exile is incurred. And this is such a powerful message because people always speak about, oh, this rabbi said this to me, this rabbi said that to me. And there's a certain pushing off responsibility that can take place there, but there's a certain truth to it as well. When we, as teachers, as parents, we have to be careful with our words. And when we are told that we made a mistake, we have to have the confidence to backtrack, apologize, and try and make it better. Not double downing. So, that's Avtalion. Now, Reb Shimon ben Gamliel says something else. The importance of silence. The importance of silence and the primacy of action. And Rav Hirsch points out such a powerful idea that from a neuropsychological standpoint is being played out today. People who make speeches, people who wax poetically about moral issues, people who talk, even if they're supposed to, about important ideas, sometimes can forget that they actually have to do them, and talking about them takes a place. Moral posturing may have a place. You may be a teacher, but you have to focus on action, because if you don't, you think the mere talking about it takes the place. And this plays itself out in psychology today. People are obsessed with watching motivational videos. Say, well, why would someone be interested in watching it? And there's data to back this up. People watch motivational videos. The people who watch sports videos and people who watch breakdancing videos, the part of the brain lights up when they're doing it themselves. There is a certain kick that is given through watching something. In a similar way, you talk about something, you kind of get the moral kick, but you haven't actually done anything. The value of silence and the primacy of action. So, that's Perek Aleph. Now, obviously there is plenty more, but these were the ones that stood out to me as being, that's a cool way of approaching this. So, please God next week with Perek Base, and as always, have a wonderful week.